So if the West Coast is indeed the Nazi Germany of hip hop, then how are Kendrick Lamar, Tupac Shakur, and Suge Knight involved? What do they have to do with any of this? It's a fair question. Let's talk about it. So, in the First World War, the leader of Germany was Kaiser Wilhelm II. He was the eldest grandchild of Prince Albert and Queen Victoria. They went on to have 42 total grandchildren, and Kaiser Wilhelm was an interesting figure, to say the least. So he was born with a birth defect. The birth defect was essentially a withered arm, a withered left arm. Basically, the family physician accidentally tore his brachial plexus during birth, and it was a breech birth. And this is a breech birth in the 1800s, and so you can only imagine all the additional complications there. There was even like a lack of oxygen for some time. But aside from that, the birth, went through okay. Now, fast forward, Kaiser Wilhelm II becomes Kaiser in 1888. So he's the leader, the unquestioned leader of Germany, essentially. And, in short, he spends the rest of his life attempting to overcome, or overcompensate rather, this disability that he has, essentially where his left arm is rendered essentially useless. The people that are closest to him even, for all those years, describe him as spoiled, petulant, unreasonable, and above all, and this is why I'm mentioning him, insecure. So many believe that one of the primary reasons why Germany gets thrown into the First World War, or at the very least gets thrown into it as quickly as they did, is primarily because Kaiser Wilhelm was attempting to assert his masculinity. He was always an insecure guy. His cousins, the other members of the royal family, described him as, this type of a guy that would attempt to assert his masculinity in a number of different ways. And some people believe that this sort of thinking, this mentality of asserting his masculinity in his really toxic sort of ways, but essentially in an effort to overcome his disability, is again what plunges Germany into the war far and away quicker than they would have been. And some people have even said, that it's the primary reason that Germany was plunged into the war at all. Now, I think that's oversimplifying it, but there's certainly something to that. So, regardless of what you believe, many of the people that are closest to him believe that this attempt to assert his masculinity, this attempt to overcompensate for his disability, had a lot more to do with why Germany ended up being plunged into the war so quickly than it ever did about protecting the honor of Franz Ferdinand, who was assassinated in Sarajevo in June of 1914. And I think that's fair. In short, the West Coast, and yes, Kendrick Lamar, Tupac Shakur, and Suge Knight And I would even argue, Los Angeles hip hop, and by extension, West Coast hip hop, suffer from a kind of insecurity. They have a chip on their shoulders, the size of a mountain. And we all know it. We see it. We see it all the time. We see it not only out of them, we see it out of rappers specifically that are of a certain age, that are gang affiliated a lot of times, because that environment breeds, what I imagine to be tons of fear, tons of anxiety, and again, just coming from that environment, man, and being in that environment, I can only imagine, what those guys deal with and what they go through. But the fact of the matter is that, there's an insecurity there for lots of valid and fair reasons. But that doesn't justify the nonsense that goes along with that, that culture. It just doesn't. Tupac Shakur, Kendrick Lamar, and Suge Knight, and the gangs they're affiliated with, set in motion events that, sadly resulted in the deaths of far too many people. Certainly Tupac Shakur himself. It resulted in numerous attempts on Suge Knight's life. It resulted in the death of the Notorious B.I.G. Gang culture in general resulted in the deaths of many rappers that were very, very important to the culture of hip hop. Some of these are Pop Smoke, P&B Rock, and again, there have been countless, acts of violence as a result. The East-West feud part 2, the West Coast has primarily been under the leadership and tutelage, if you will, right? If we're likening the East Coast to a country, or California even, to be more specific as a country, even though this applies to more states than just California. And it's been under Kendrick Lamar's leadership. If we had to choose a leader, right? The Game and Snoop and other rappers formally passed the torch over to Kendrick Lamar, right? And Kendrick Lamar has done a lot of good, specifically as it relates to his attempts to unite the gangs in his environment, in his city, in his state, right? This is something that a lot of people don't talk about. I think that's also because a lot of the things that he's done have been symbolic, and there have been things that gang members recognize, but the average person, the layman, wouldn't know about, right? I'm an example of that. I know about them through research and talking to people that are, closer to that environment than I am, but he's done a lot of things and he should get credit for that, right? However, it could be argued that at times he's attempted to unite gangs and to bring an end to a lot of the violence that are associated with gangs, specifically in his area, in his state, in his city, by making choices to show his loyalty, to show, that group of people how important it is that that essentially they start making better choices to abstain from gang violence and whatever. But in doing that, a lot of times, I believe that Kendrick Lamar has made choices that have been good for his region, that have been positive for, the gang he's affiliated with, even that have been good and positive for the artist from his area, from his region, from the label that he was formerly affiliated with, but bad for hip hop. Bad for the culture of hip hop. And something that's very important that not enough people recognize is that when Kendrick Lamar is talking about the culture, when he's lamenting about hip hop and the culture, let's be very clear. He's talking about West Coast culture. He's talking about gang culture. He's talking about street urban culture. He is not talking about hip hop culture in the context that we usually mean it. He isn't. And there's nothing you can say that will convince me of otherwise, because the moves that he's made and that he is currently making are clear evidence that that's the culture he's referring to, not the one that we are referring to. We being the greater extended hip hop community. So, you can't say that you want world peace and then you start a war, an unprovoked war in hip hop. You can't say that you want world peace, so to speak, to stay with the World War theme, right? You can't say that you want world peace, but you're starting, unprovoked wars. You can't do it. You cannot do it. So if you want to unite gangs in LA, if you want to unite gang affiliates in LA, in California, on the West Coast, on the block that you grew up on, awesome. I love it. But not if you're going to have to destroy hip hop to do it. And let me say it a different way. If you want to unite the gangs in LA, if you want to better your local community where you grew up in California, in LA, by addressing gang politics, I think that's wonderful. But if you're going to destroy hip hop to do it, or if you don't care if you destroy hip hop to do it, or if you don't care if you're destroying a person's career, Drake's career, if you are destroying the careers of other artists perhaps to do it, to achieve that end, then I don't think that's right. That's terrible. There are no good villains. You're a villain or you're a hero. And I believe that Kendrick Lamar is undoubtedly a villain for many, many, many reasons, but he is undoubtedly a villain. There's just not a question about that. And I think we have to ask ourselves this question. By choosing Kendrick Lamar, are we saying that our culture if by choosing Kendrick Lamar in the East-West feud part 2, are we saying that our culture, are we saying that in our culture, it's a greater crime to be an outsider than it is to actually perpetuate the very things that we know are destroying our communities, i.e. gang violence and all the other crimes and issues that go along with that? That's the question that we have to answer. When we talk about the culture, are we talking about hip hop culture? And if we are, is hip hop culture black culture because it's inherently associated with black people because we created it? And if that's the case, is gang culture black culture? Are they synonymous? Is gang culture synonymous with black culture? And if so, what does that say about black people? And if that's the case, what does that say about hip hop culture? Are these three things intrinsically connected? And if so, what does that say about us? Not only as a people, black people, but as a culture, hip hop culture. Is hip hop culture intrinsically connected to gang culture? Is that a choice that we've made? Are we more comfortable with gang culture being connected to hip hop culture and by extension black people and black culture than we are allowing a person that's from another country but who has a black father, who's from America, who's from the American South? Are we more comfortable with gang violence and gang culture than we are embracing a person that reminds us that we're better than that we could be better than that? These are questions that we have to grapple with. We have to.